Brock Lesnar just humiliated Paul Heyman in front of millions of people in the most degrading, most shocking, most uncomfortable segment in Raw history. What happened wasn't wrestling storytelling. It was public abuse disguised as entertainment. And the fact that WWE not only allowed this to happen but filmed it and broadcast it to the world should make everyone question what boundaries even exist anymore. Paul Heyman, a 60-year-old man, was stripped down to his underwear on live television while Brock Lesnar laughed, and the crowd didn't know whether to cheer or call the police. This wasn't a worked angle. This was revenge taken to an extreme that has people genuinely asking if criminal charges should be filed. The Beast incarnate crossed a line that can never be uncrossed, and Paul Heyman's dignity was destroyed in front of the entire wrestling world for reasons that go deeper than storyline and venture into legitimate personal animosity that's been brewing for months behind closed doors. Before we break down every horrifying second of what Brock did to Paul and expose the real reason why this public degradation happened, I need you to answer this. Was this the most uncomfortable segment you've ever watched on WWE television? Or have you seen worse? Comment yes or no because I need to gauge how traumatized everyone is right now. Let's establish the context because understanding why Brock did this makes it even more disturbing. Paul Heyman and Brock Lesnar have had one of the most complicated relationships in wrestling history. 20 years of alliance, betrayal, reunion, and mutual benefit. Paul made Brock a legend with his advocacy, and Brock made Paul relevant by association. It was supposed to be mutually beneficial. But according to multiple backstage sources, their relationship has been toxic for the past year. The public sees the partnership, the promos, the reigning, defending introductions. What they don't see is Paul allegedly taking a larger percentage of Brock's merchandise sales than agreed upon. They don't see Paul supposedly making side deals with WWE management that benefit him financially while limiting Brock's creative freedom. They don't see the betrayals happening behind the scenes while Paul smiles and plays advocate on camera. Brock found out about Paul's dealings 3 months ago. He's been seething ever since, planning this revenge, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy Paul Heyman in the most public, humiliating way possible. Last night was that moment. Quick question. How long have Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman been associated on and off in WWE? Drop your answer and let's see who remembers the full history. Raw opened with Paul Heyman in the ring doing what he does best. Cutting a promo hyping up Brock Lesnar. He was going through his usual routine, praising the Beast incarnate, building anticipation for Brock's appearance. The crowd was eating it up, Paul in his element, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Brock's music hit, and he came out with an expression that should have been Paul's first warning sign. This wasn't the confident, dominant Brock. This was angry Brock, the version that shows up when someone has legitimately pissed him off. His jaw was clenched, his eyes locked on Paul with an intensity that went beyond kayfabe. Paul started his introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul Heyman, and I am the advocate for the reigning, defending. Brock snatched the microphone out of his hand mid-sentence. The disrespect of that action alone was shocking, but it was just the beginning. Brock spoke, and his voice was ice-cold. Shut up, Paul. Just shut your lying mouth for once in your miserable life. The crowd went silent, sensing this wasn't following any script they'd been told about. Paul's face went white, genuine fear flashing across his features. You think I don't know what you've been doing? Brock continued. You think I haven't figured out how you've been stealing from me, making deals behind my back, treating me like I'm just another client you can manipulate and control? Paul tried to respond, stammering something about misunderstandings and wanting to talk privately. Brock grabbed him by his tie, yanking him close. We're done talking privately. Everything happens public now. You humiliated me behind closed doors. I'm returning the favor in front of everyone. Comment your immediate reaction to Brock's tone. Did this feel like a work or a shoot to you? Because even the hardest marks were questioning what was real. That's when Brock started unbuttoning Paul's suit jacket. Paul's eyes went wide with panic, realizing what was about to happen. He tried to pull away, but Brock's grip was iron. The jacket came off, tossed carelessly out of the ring. Paul was pleading now, actually begging Brock to stop, to not do this, to please have mercy. The crowd didn't know how to react. Some were cheering because they thought it was an entertaining angle. Others were dead silent, uncomfortable with the genuine distress they were seeing from Paul Heyman. The commentary team was struggling to sell it, their voices uncertain about whether to play this as entertainment or acknowledge how wrong it felt. Brock removed Paul's tie next, wrapping it around his own fist like he was considering choking Paul with it before throwing it aside. Then he started on the shirt, ripping buttons off in his haste to strip Paul down. Paul was actively fighting now, trying to cover himself, trying to maintain some dignity. But he's a 60-year-old non-wrestler against the most physically dominant human being in WWE history. He had no chance. The shirt came off, revealing Paul in his undershirt. The crowd's reaction was getting more uncomfortable by the second. This had crossed from angle into something that felt legitimately violating. Paul's body language was pure humiliation, hunched over trying to cover himself, tears actually forming in his eyes. But Brock wasn't done. He grabbed Paul and forced him to stand upright, then started unbuckling Paul's belt. Paul was shaking his head, mouthing "please don't" over and over, but Brock was relentless. The belt came off with a snap, and Brock held it up like a trophy before whipping it across Paul's back. The crack of leather on skin made everyone wince. Paul cried out in pain, a sound so genuine that several people at ringside looked legitimately concerned. Brock hit him again, and again, each strike leaving red welts visible even through Paul's undershirt. Question for the comments. Should WWE officials have stopped this? Or were they right to let it play out for the storyline? Where's your line? Then came the moment everyone's talking about, the image that's going to define this segment forever. Brock grabbed Paul's pants and yanked them down in one swift motion. Paul fell trying to pull them back up, landing on the mat in just his undershirt and underwear, completely exposed and humiliated in front of millions of viewers. The crowd gasped. The commentary team went silent for a solid 5 seconds, genuinely not knowing what to say. This wasn't wrestling anymore. This was public degradation, and everyone watching knew they were witnessing something that had crossed every boundary of acceptable television. Paul was sobbing now, curled up on the mat trying to cover himself, his dignity completely destroyed. Brock stood over him, not with triumph but with cold satisfaction, like a man who'd finally settled a score that needed settling regardless of the cost. Then Brock spoke again, and what he said is why people are speculating this was at least partially a shoot. You've been sucking the life out of me for 20 years, Paul, taking MY money, taking credit for MY accomplishments, living off MY legacy. Tonight, everyone sees what you really are, a pathetic leech who's nothing without me. He grabbed Paul's clothes and threw them at his exposed body. Get dressed, get out of my ring, and if you ever speak my name again without my permission, what I did to you tonight will look like mercy compared to what comes next. Brock left Paul lying there in his underwear, walking up the ramp without looking back while medical staff and producers rushed to cover Paul with towels and help him backstage. The camera lingered on Paul's humiliated, broken form for several seconds before cutting to commercial. Rate the segment. Entertainment or exploitation? Drop a number 1 to 10 where 1 is completely inappropriate and 10 is greatest heel heat ever. The immediate backstage reaction was chaos. Multiple wrestlers confronted producers asking if that was supposed to happen. Women's roster members were reportedly furious that such a degrading, humiliating segment was allowed to air, arguing it sets a dangerous precedent about what's acceptable on WWE television. Seth Rollins tweeted during the show, "I don't care what Paul did behind the scenes. What I just watched was a 60-year-old man being publicly humiliated and borderline assaulted on live TV. This isn't entertainment, it's abuse." Surprisingly, Roman Reigns, Paul's other major client, has been silent. No social media posts, no public statements. Some speculate Roman was in on whatever Paul allegedly did that made Brock this angry. Others think Roman is staying quiet because he doesn't want to get involved in what might become a legal situation. Kevin Owens provided context in a since-deleted tweet. Without getting into specifics, Paul made some moves that financially hurt several wrestlers, including Brock. I'm not saying what Brock did was right, but I understand why he's that angry. The tweet was up for less than 10 minutes before Kevin deleted it, probably after WWE Legal contacted him. So what did Paul allegedly do? Based on piecing together multiple reports and backstage whispers, here's the story that's emerging. Paul Heyman allegedly renegotiated merchandise splits for both Brock and Roman without telling them, taking a larger percentage than their original agreements specified. We're talking millions of dollars over the past few years. When Brock's accountant discovered the discrepancy 6 months ago, Brock confronted Paul privately. Paul allegedly promised to fix it, to return the money, to make things right. But instead of doing that, Paul supposedly went to WWE management and negotiated a new contract for himself that protected him legally from any financial clawback, essentially making it impossible for Brock to recover the money Paul had allegedly taken. Comment: if these allegations are true, does that justify what Brock did? Or are there no circumstances that justify public humiliation like that? When Brock discovered Paul had protected himself instead of making amends, that's when he started planning this revenge. He couldn't sue Paul without expensive legal battles that might take years. He couldn't get WWE to punish Paul because Paul had made himself too valuable to management. So Brock decided on the one form of revenge Paul couldn't defend against: destroying his dignity on live television. The legal implications are massive. Paul Heyman could potentially sue WWE and Brock for workplace harassment, emotional distress, and public humiliation. WWE could be liable for allowing this to happen on their programming. Brock could face charges if Paul decides to press them, though that seems unlikely given the financial situation that allegedly provoked this. More likely, this gets settled behind closed doors with NDAs and financial agreements that ensure nobody talks about what really happened. WWE will spin this as storyline that got intense and move forward like nothing unusual occurred. The Paul Heyman character might be finished after this. How does he recover his credibility as an advocate after being stripped to his underwear and humiliated on international television? How does he command respect when everyone's seen him crying and begging for mercy? Some are speculating this is Paul's exit from WWE, that he and WWE management agreed to this segment as his send-off before he retires or moves to a behind-the-scenes role. It would explain why it was so extreme, as a way to write him off television permanently while giving Brock his revenge. Others think Paul will return seeking revenge, possibly aligning with someone who can match Brock physically. Gunther? Bronson Reed? Someone who can stand up to the beast while Paul provides the brains and motivation. Your prediction: is Paul Heyman done as an on-screen character, or will he return for revenge? Drop your theory below. The segment has created massive controversy outside of wrestling circles. Mainstream media outlets are covering it, not as wrestling news but as potentially problematic content that aired on USA Network. Think pieces are being written about dignity, consent, and whether this type of humiliation should be considered entertainment. Parent groups are complaining that children watching Raw witnessed what essentially amounted to public bullying and forced stripping. Advertisers are being contacted and asked if they're comfortable being associated with this type of content. This could have real business consequences for WWE beyond just wrestling discourse. WWE's official statement has been predictably vague. Last night's Raw featured an intense confrontation between Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman that reflected the real tensions in their long-standing relationship. Both performers were aware of the segment's direction and agreed to the content that aired. That phrase, agreed to the content, is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Did Paul agree to be stripped to his underwear? Did he agree to be whipped with a belt? Did he agree to cry and beg on camera? Or did he agree to a confrontation that Brock then took further than anyone anticipated? The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Paul likely knew Brock was going to humiliate him, but not the extent to which it would happen. Brock probably had approval for physical confrontation. This is the danger of blurring reality, degrading elements in the moment. When wrestlers have real legitimate anger, putting them in segments together can result in shoots disguised as works. And when one person is as physically dominant as Brock Lesnar, the other person has no ability to protect themselves if things go off script. Trivia question: what year did Paul Heyman first become Brock Lesnar's advocate? Test your knowledge in the comments. The locker room is reportedly split on this. Older veterans think it's great old-school heat and that Paul should have known better than to cross Brock financially. Younger wrestlers are uncomfortable with the segment and worried about what it means for workplace safety if this type of thing is acceptable. Several women wrestlers have privately expressed concern that if forcibly stripping someone to their underwear on TV is okay when it's Brock and Paul, what prevents similar degrading segments being pitched for women's storylines? The precedent this sets is dangerous from a creative standpoint. There's also the question of whether Brock went into business for himself. Did he take a planned segment and make it more extreme than rehearsed because of his legitimate anger? If so, does WWE punish him, or do they accept it because it created massive buzz and conversation? My read: WWE is thrilled with the attention this is getting despite the controversy. They'll weather the backlash from parent groups and media critics because wrestling fans are talking about Raw more than they have in months. The segment will be edited or removed from Peacock eventually, but the immediate impact accomplished exactly what they wanted: people caring about WWE programming again. Paul will either leave WWE, is done, move whether to they ever appear together on television or return as an on-screen character aligned against but the real-life friendship or there's no other path forward that makes sense. You don't come back Brock from has cemented himself as the most dangerous person. You don't strip someone to their underwear on not because of his physical abilities, but because he'll cross any line to settle scores. Nobody will feel comfortable crossing Brock after watching what he did to Paul, which might be exactly the point. Final question: if you were Paul Heyman, how would you respond? Lawsuit? Physical revenge with backup? Leave WWE entirely? Let me know what you'd do. What Brock Lesnar did to Paul Heyman will be discussed, analyzed, and debated for years. It might be the most uncomfortable segment in modern WWE history. It might be brilliant storytelling that created genuine emotion. It might be legitimate abuse that crossed ethical boundaries. It's probably all three simultaneously, which is what makes this so complicated and fascinating. Share this video with everyone who missed what happened or doesn't understand why this is such a big deal. Share it with people who think wrestling is fake and scripted and controlled, because what they witnessed was the intersection of real animosity and fictional storytelling creating something uncomfortable and real. Subscribe to SUPLEX Ring Saga because we'll be covering every development. Paul's response, potential legal issues, locker room fallout, and whether WWE faces any consequences for airing what some are calling exploitative content. Brock Lesnar undressed Paul Heyman on live television, destroying his dignity and possibly ending their 20-year relationship permanently. Whether this was justified revenge